Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Momentum. Let's build some momentum for interrupting and ending race based hatred and violence. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am the moderator for the Facebook group, What Is Mine to Do, where every day we ask ourselves and each other the question, what is mine to do to interrupt or end race based hatred and violence? And just in case this is your first time seeing Momentum or being exposed to me, the 90-second version is I do work with leaders and with organizations all over the United States on strategy for all aspects of cross-cultural communication, inclusion, and building strong teams and strong leaders. But with the What Is Mine to Do Facebook group, we focus specifically on the dimension of diversity that is race, racism, race relations, because for many people, that is the one that is the most difficult to navigate or to know what you don't know, right? To know how to build effective relationships and how to recognize your own bias and unconscious bias and what to do about it. So, Momentum is a part of the What Is Mine to Do collection of work. And in 15 minutes or less, I try to give you an idea, a tip, a tool, a technique, something to think about that you can then integrate into your life so that together we can build momentum to interrupt racism. So, today the theme is bias. Like, what is it, and what can I do about it? So we're going to talk about it in this way. Bias: name it, claim it, then choose to change it. Name it, claim it, then choose to change it. And sometimes when I find myself sharing about or digging into the topic of bias, I chuckle a little bit because unconscious bias, maybe, in the last 5 years or 6 years, seems to be, a hot topic or a topic that people are like, oh, we have unconscious bias, like it's something new. But of course, it's not new. It wasn't new 20 plus, whoa, 1998, 27 years ago, when I wrote a book titled Breaking the Barrier of Bias. Like, it wasn't new then. There had been research for decades about just how our brains think and process information. And we are trained to make decisions and distinctions and label whether this is a good way to do things or a bad way. And is that going to give me the result that I want? And all that is bias or preference. And much of what we have in our world that shows up as our individual or collective bias is a result of very specific socialization, because every community, every profession, every group of people actually creates biases and teaches people to follow them. So, the first thing to keep in mind about bias is that really the definition is just preference, right? Preference for something or preference against something. But it's a preference, it's a prejudgment, it is an assumption we make about something or someone. And often we do this with people un in an unaware or unintentional way, because we get these visual cues of what they look like, or these auditory clues based on how they what they sound like, or something that someone is wearing or that they're doing, and our brain goes click 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 click, that's inappropriate, or oh, I don't like that, or oh, people who dress that way or wear their hair that way, it has a meaning to us that may or may not be true. But we then make decisions based on those assumptions, and that's how bias shows up in our life. So the first thing to do is really to name it, and to name it recognizing that every human being, and let's talk about adults. Let's limit this conversation right now to adults. So every adult has biases, and there is no way that someone who can be alive, functioning, and going through their day-to-day life without biases. So if you're that person who says, I don't have a bias bone in my body because you've been defining bias as the act of discrimination, then I want you to just think about this after this episode is over, because you're not only doing yourself a disservice, but it makes it really difficult to have the kind of conversations you need to have when you are using that definition, which is not the actual definition that is used in sociology, anthropology, psychology, any of the applied behavioral sciences. So it's not Tracy telling you that biases just means uh, prejudgment or preference. If you even go to the dictionary online, any of them, most of them, that's going to be preference. It's going to be the first thing you see, or it's going to be in the, top 3 or 4 definitions that you see for the word bias or biases. And back, 25 plus years ago, when I wrote the book, Breaking the Barrier of Bias, the Subtle Influence of Bias and What to Do About It, which was the subtitle. In the chapter on understanding bias, I highlight 4 things that make it difficult for us to recognize our biases because they're so built in. So I'm just going to read that, and then we'll talk a little bit about claiming and choosing to change. For most of us, 4 things make recognizing our own biases difficult, if not impossible. First, we equate bias with discrimination. Second, we don't want to challenge our own assumptions. Third, we are uncomfortable admitting our lack of knowledge. And 4, we will do just about anything to avoid conflict. Many people will do just about anything to avoid conflict. So there's another episode where I really go through each one of those 4 in quite a bit of detail, but I highlight them here because the problem begins when we don't really understand the definition of bias, and then we don't name it, right? We name a lot of other things bias when they're really a decision to take an action that disadvantages someone, which then would be discrimination. The bias is internal. It is in our thoughts or in our belief system, and it really can't do anything unless we act upon it. And so it's really, really helpful to be able to recognize what is the bias for something or against something. And a lot of times when we have a bias for a group or for something, what shows up in our behavior is we think we're being for something, but we're having a negative impact on what we're against. And that's not always unavoidable. But if we don't even recognize that it's the bias that is making me act, the bias is driving my behavior, and that's psychologically normal, but it doesn't have to drive my behavior. If I see it's a bias and it doesn't apply, I can choose different behavior. If I am in a service position and growing up, I was never around people who speak with accents and with accents different from my own. And now I'm working with a number of people who were trained or raised in Asian cultures, and I'm not accustomed to hearing that accent, then I have a bias. I could have a bias that they don't speak English well. No, they probably speak English just fine and may even have better grammar than I do because they literally studied English, but I'm not used to hearing the accent. And so in my mind, oh, I don't want to work with that person. Or, oh, could I have a different doctor? Or, oh, is there a different server who could, because I can't understand that person. And though that bias, I don't mean, I'm really thinking what's going to make me comfortable more so than am I being respectful to someone else. So our biases can run us without us knowing it if we're not paying attention. So, of course, bias, name it. Name what bias is, understand it, and then start looking at how it shows up in your words and actions. And that's what claiming it is about. Using the example I just used, which is an example that I had to work through a couple decades ago, or really longer ago than that, when I first was when I was in healthcare, and I was working with a lot of people who had been trained or had grown up in different parts of the world, in Asia, in Thailand, in the Philippines, in Japan, and lots of places. And my ear was not accustomed to really having to listen, to understand, or to take in. And so it's like, oh, once I see that this is me being uncomfortable, but I know this nurse has had 15 years of experience, and I know this lab tech has been in the US for 20 years. And yes, they have an accent, but they have worked in a number of labs where all of their reviews were great. And now they've moved to my city, and we have an opportunity to use that experience. Am I going to not hire this person because they're difficult for me to understand? But if I slow down and actually listen, their English is fine. It's just the accent. So, there are all kinds of ways that as leaders in organizations, or when we're working with people on a team in the workplace or at our church community, or even in our social groups, if we don't notice, oh, this is me, this is a false belief that I have. And I might exclude people for the wrong reasons, not based on their skill, not based on their ability, not based on their education, not based on all the things that matter, especially in the workplace, but instead because I'm a little uncomfortable because they're different from me in a way that I have not had to navigate before. So when I claim that, I'm like, oh, wait, now I'm consciously thinking about it. I want the best person on the team who has the skill to do the job. Oh, okay. I need to make some adjustments, and then I can help other people make adjustments if they are making the same assumptions that I am making. So we want to name it, then we want to claim it, and that last part of the example, that's when we get to choose to change the false belief, change the assumption, change what we think, and then change what we do in order to make sure that race, in this case, race-based hatred and violence, race-based assumptions, race-based biases are not driving our behavior. That's the momentum builder for today. Bias. Name it, claim it, and then choose to change it. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm so glad you joined me today. Please, please, please come hang out with us over at the What Is Mine to Do group on Facebook. And I'll see you again next week.